Hello, everybody. I am Brian Liberge, and welcome to our fantastic panel. Which panel is this? It's the Inner Demons, Anxiety, and Depression in Gamers panel. You're going to have a swell time with us here tonight. We're going to talk about a number of things. This is a panel that has been to several conventions. I know specifically, at least off the top of my head, it's been featured at Gen Con. It's been featured at PAX East. It was started by Philippe Antoine Menard, who you might know better as the chatty DM, writer for such tabletops games as Marvel Heroic and video games like the Assassin's Creed series. It's since gone on and has been featured without Phil, even though we would love to have Phil here. Phil couldn't make it this weekend. And the purpose of this panel is to talk about mental health and to talk about it in a way where we can tell our personal stories and build normalcy and build empathy. One of the things that we're not going to do tonight is diagnose anyone. We're not going to tell people what they should be doing to live their life. We don't have anybody on the panel tonight that is a psychologist or a psychiatrist. We are all people who live with mental health issues, and we are going to be talking about our own experiences. That is the purpose of this panel. So with that in mind, I am looking at my own table of contents here, and I didn't write in when I would introduce the panel. So let's do that right now. In fact, what I'm really going to do is call on each panelist individually to introduce themselves. So why don't we start with you, Sade?
Hi everyone, Sade or Ambrose here, she, they pronouns. I am obviously in the TTRPG scene. I am on the podcast Lovely Craftians, which is a Call of Cthulhu actual play. It's been going on for 4 years. But you can also find me on Tabletop, playing in the Hunter the Reckoning game, as well as you'll see me soon on Fables Once in Future at the end of this month. We'll be starting up on Carry On Comfort. By day I'm a UX UI designer. But yeah, that's me.
Great. And if let's see here. And if you're comfortable, do you mind specifically naming what type of health issues, mental health issues that you live with?
Currently, the thing that has been hitting me really hard has been grief in all forms that it comes in. So the loss of someone heavily impacting, as well as other losses, anxiety, and situational depression, I would say, and imposter syndrome. I guess if you want to throw that in there.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Let's now jump over to Jacqueline.
Hello, I'm Jacqueline Bryk. I also go by Jax Romana, or just Jax, never Jackie. My pronouns are she, her, they, them, and Femme. I am a tabletop writer, designer, editor. I've done art direction. I've done pretty much everything you can do with producing RPG books, except for Kickstarter, layout, art. But yeah, I've done almost everything on the writing and development side. And I was nominated for 2 Annie Awards this weekend, so I'm pretty excited about that. I write for all sorts of things. I've written for Changing the Lost 2nd edition. I've written for Cult Divinity Lost. I'm the English language editor for Cult Divinity Lost. I've written for a whole bunch of stuff in Chronicles of Darkness. I've written for the new edition of Fading Suns. I kind of hoard projects like a squirrel. And thankfully we're in a break between projects, which is very helpful. The 2 main things I struggle with are complex post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as ADHD. And as you can see, I'm currently sitting in my bed, my lovely background here, because it has been kind of difficult for me to leave my bed today, and my nervous system has been fried. So I'm really excited to be on this panel and sort of talk about trauma and madness and mad pride with a capital M, and how that affects me and my games.
Fantastic. Well, fantastic that you're here. We're very happy that you're here. Let's see here. And Bob, would you go ahead and introduce yourself for us?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Bob Smith. Pronouns are he, him. You would probably know me from pretty much nowhere. I am not involved in really any of the online communities or streams. I don't follow much of anything because sometimes I feel like I'm a little on the old side. My kids like to remind me of that. I have been GMing for a very, very, very long time. If you've run into me at a convention, it was most likely while I was GMing at Games on Demand. And you'll find me doing that at Gen Con, PAX East, PAX Unplugged. When I'm not doing that, I do lots of dad things, way into flight simulators and things like that. I was in the Army for about a decade. The diagnoses that I deal with as best I can are also complex PTSD, major depressive disorder, and general anxiety. So it kind of runs the spectrum. I suspect that all of it is just the CPTSD and doesn't merit its own things. But I did just recently do a new neuropsychology exam, and they ruled me out on the clinical checklist
Oh,
PTSD. So I've made a lot of progress in doing that. And I'll just throw it out there right now and get it over with. One of my personal struggles through it has been self-harm. And so, but I'll say now that I think I'm about a year sober from doing it now.
good. Thank you, Bob. And I won't let Bob fully get away with saying that you shouldn't know who they are. If you are familiar with the convention scene at all, you might have seen Bob speak on panels, at least at Gen Con, at PAX East. Bob runs a number of panels at Gen Con and has been doing it for quite some time. So, but Bob is here, and you may know Bob. And of course, my name is Brian. I said at the beginning, I'm Brian Liberge. I use he and she series pronouns. I have written a fair amount for tabletop RPGs for companies like Rage and Swan, Cobalt Press, Gygax Magazine. I've done some self-publishing as Beer Start Games. I've done a bunch of public speaking, including this panel, as I previously mentioned. I live with clinical anxiety and clinical depression. And as a transgender person, not that all transgender people deal with this, but one of my lovely things is gender dysphoria. So that's where I'm coming from. There's a couple of things I want to introduce real quick, and then we're going to talk to our panelists and learn more about their stories. The first, I'll let you know what it is before I actually do it. It's a slide that is just the current, what's the best word for this? I want to make sure I don't misspeak. It's the current symptoms of clinical depression. Now, that's not to say these are the only things that come up if you are depressed, but this is generally what people in the professional field use when they're checking to see if you have enough symptoms that they can write on their piece of paper that you are clinically depressed. And this is something that's been part of the panel for a long time. Clinical depression is something that is misunderstood. And we're going to talk about a lot more than clinical depression, but this is something that I've kept in the panel just because I think not only do these symptoms have changed over time, but I think it's something that's not as well known as it could be. So let me make this bigger, and we'll just go through them real quick. Here we go. And now if I've done that correctly, everyone should be able to see my slide. So I'm just going to go through this really quickly. Like I said earlier, we're not diagnosing anyone. I just really want people to be aware what these currently are. So we've got sadness or depressed mood most of the day or almost every day. Loss of enjoyment in things that were once pleasurable. Sometimes when you're looking at checklists for depression, they will specifically mention that sex counts. You know, if you stop enjoying sex, and you used to enjoy sex, well, that counts as something that was once pleasurable. Major change in weight, that is a gain or loss of more than 5% of your weight within a month, or also a major change in your appetite. Sometimes you eat more, sometimes you eat less. Insomnia, or excessive sleep almost every day. Another one where it's it can go in either direction. Physical restlessness or sense of being run down that others notice. Fatigue or loss of energy almost every day. Feelings of hopelessness or worthlessness or excessive guilt almost every day. Problems with concentration or making decisions almost every day. Aches, pains, headaches, or cramps that won't go away. Digestive problems that don't get better even with treatment. And reoccurring thoughts of death or suicide, suicide plans, suicide attempts. Now, generally, you only need to have a certain number of these symptoms to be diagnosed with clinical depression. Like I said, these symptoms have changed over time. I don't have on me how many symptoms you need to be diagnosed. That's something you should talk to a professional about. I left it off here because I know that's something that's changed over time, and we're not here to diagnose individuals. But these are things that you should be aware of. And one of the things I do want to highlight here is how frequently the list of symptoms use the phrase almost every day. One of the things that I think leads to some misinformation about depression is just the idea that, yes, almost everyone does get depressed sometimes. And when we're talking about general depression, we're talking about something that is a lot more manageable or easier to manage than clinical depression. It's something that doesn't keep coming back in excessive frequency. So that's one of the reasons why we still go through this one, even though we talk about a lot of other things than clinical depression. And then I only have one more slide that I'm going to share, and we're going to get back to people's stories. And how do I share it? Go like this. Okay, this is a list of hotlines and resources. I'm going to put this in the Discord later. I'm also going to blast it on social media later. But if you have a moment, go ahead and take a screenshot. These are good numbers to have. They're not all phone numbers. Some of these are chat lines. There's a lot of resources out there. It's a exceptionally difficult time right now. And the way this list is sorted, I want to point out that the column that says I want to talk is labeled like that because all of those lines have been vetted so that if you call them, they are not going to kick you off the line if you're not in crisis mode, if you're not suicidal. You can call these things, even if you don't feel like you're on the edge. You don't have to wait that long. If you are in a place where you feel like you could really benefit from talking to somebody, these are all for you. All right. So I am going to take this down, but like I said, I'll make sure that it goes in the Discord and I'll make sure it goes on social media. But I want to be sure that you can also see us while we're talking. Boop, there we are. Okay, let's see here. I'm just looking at my own structure. So let's start talking to the panelists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pose a question and I'm going to go one panelist at the time and get them to answer those questions. Now, the panelists might go wild and ask each other follow-up questions, and that's fine. It's not going to be one of those panels where I go, no, I haven't addressed you yet. It's not what we're doing. We really are having a guided conversation. If you, listening to this live, hear something that you don't understand because it's a term that you're just not familiar with, I will be looking at the chat every so often. And if you just write there, I don't understand what X means, I will When appropriate, stop, and I'll rephrase that. But we aren't really going to be taking, we're not going to do a question and answer session in this particular panel, just so everybody knows. So let's get started. All right. Bob, you've done this panel before, so why don't I start with you? Do you mind sharing with us some of the symptoms that you experience with your mental health issues?
Muted.
Of course, I'm muted. The most difficult ones, I'll just start with those, and that would be, a very, very strong urge to punish myself. That self-harm urge. I'll call that on the downside of down energy, and then on the up energy, I'd call it that anxiety. Panicking, being unable to be around people, feeling hypersensitive to my personal space bubble. And there are definite triggers that kind of set those things off. Sometimes I'm able to prepare for them, sometimes not. But those are the more acute things. On the less acute side of things can be general just persistence of that down mood of just being very just flat, not enjoying anything. Although I have all of these hobbies, and things, pastimes and things like that to keep me busy, I will go on extended stretches of times where I'm doing them and I'm just not loving them. I'm not getting anything out of it. I keep doing them because I know they're good for me. Crawling up into a hole I know is not good for me, and I think I'm able to sometimes suss out and remind myself of those things to kind of get better behavior. Sometimes I struggle with interacting with people, and that might come from surprise. Brian, when I'm at a game convention, I'm on mode. I'm shot out of a cannon. I'm Mr. Personality. I love everybody. But there's certainly lots of time where even around all my closest friends, like I can't stand to be around anyone, and I need a lot of space. I hit the wall on my social interaction level, and I just can't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know which diagnosis that connects to or anything like that, but they're the things that, just make life difficult. And I understand that they're related, to the illnesses that I deal with.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good point that I just want to take a moment to bring up. That people might not be aware of, that when you are dealing with multiple mental health issues, sometimes it can be difficult to discern what specific thing is causing what, because they do tend to not only overlap, but interact with each other. So, anxiety and depression are very commonly paired, but there's a lot of other stuff out there. And so it's very normal to be able to say, I know this is an issue for me. I don't know exactly why it's an issue for me today. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. Jacqueline, would you mind sharing what kind of symptoms you experience?
My symptoms are yes. I had a very funny symptom recently. My husband left for a convention, Origins actually, and was driving out. So I waited up until 2 a.m. until his ride got there. And I take an antipsychotic to sleep because one of the things that the antipsychotic does is turns off racing thoughts. And because I have ADHD and complex trauma, racing thoughts are one of the biggest barriers for me going to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if you know this, but if you stop taking an antipsychotic or you take it at the wrong time, you develop what's called false psychosis, which is a brief psychotic reaction. So I went to bed and I took my meds, and normally I take my meds between 8 and 10 p.m. and I took this one at 2:30 a.m. So I had the little suit sprites from My Neighbor Totoro and Spirited Away climbing up on my blanket going, "Are you going to bed?" "Yes, I'm going to bed." "Are you going to bed?" "Yeah, yes, I'm going to bed." And I had to deal with this very small, very charming, but very strange hallucination of these little suit sprites just looking over the edge of my covers at me going, are you asleep yet? Are you going to bed?" And I hadn't had to deal with auditory or visual hallucinations for a long time. But that was kind of an interesting symptom I had to deal with recently. Most of my other symptoms are not as amusing.
Sure.
I deal with a lot of negative self-talk, incredibly cruel self-talk a lot of the time. If you've ever read Wraith the Oblivion and you're familiar with the Shadow, you can actually pick out my self-talk from the different archetypes of the Shadow. I deal with a lot of imposter syndrome. I deal with sudden bursts of energy that I don't usually have a way to direct them to. I have a particularly disorganized attachment style that I'm learning to heal. I have all sorts of fun stuff. And like what Bob, yes.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry. Memory holes. I also have memory holes, even though your name is like right there in front of me on the screen. It's fine. I'm sorry. But there's no specific diagnosis that all of my stuff comes from, because all of my stuff is so tangled together, because complex trauma is very common in people who are neurodivergent. So people who have OCD, people who are on the autism spectrum, people who are on the ADHD spectrum, because of the way we grew up and the way the world wants to shape us and the way we are shaped. So I have a whole rant about parenting, especially abusive parenting, being a shaping attack, but I can save that for later.
Okay. All right, thank you. I appreciate you sharing. Sade, would you like to share your symptoms with us?
I would say that what I've noticed the most, and this is throughout my life in general, that this happens. It doesn't matter how well things are going or how badly things are going. It's the constant, I guess it kind of goes along the lines of negative self-talk, but it's the constant thought that people absolutely hate me. And that comes from trauma, which is something else I haven't mentioned, so I apologize, I forgot to bring that one up. But it's I was bullied for 10 plus years, and that has led to me over analyzing things on a regular basis. And it used to be worse, but went through CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy for anyone that's watching, which helps with like processing those thoughts and stopping it before it spirals out of control. And spiraling leads to, for me, deep, long stints of depression, which can go into weeks, months, sometimes depending on what causes it. Other than that, also can bleed into imposter syndrome as well, because I try to be the best I can be at everything that I do. I want to be. So I research it. I go in because it was like, I need to be great at this. I need to be good at this. I need to do the best way. If I'm going to do it, I need to do it very well. And me picking up a little too much about, it could just literally be like, hey, it has nothing to do with me. If someone does X or someone does Y, because they have their own lives. And that is the fact, that's the reminder in my brain constantly, like, hey, they're living their own life. It has nothing to do with me. The constant thing that pops up of why people hate me is I've had several traumatic events happen where, oh, everything's fine, don't worry about it. And then some explosion of emotion would come in a very horrible way that would prove like, oh, so you were lying to me? Is that what? So that was a full-on lie, and I asked you, and I was picking up on those little hints, those little things. So I value very much transparency. I know for a lot of people, it is hard. Like, it is hard to be honest about something, and you don't want to hurt people's feelings and stuff like that. But I'm very much, I need to, if it's going to be a conflict, it's better to be a minor conflict than it being an explosive conflict, because then it is like a mark in my mind that I will remember, is the best way to put it. Another thing that I do have is HSP, which is highly sensitive. I'm a highly sensitive person. So high excessive amounts of gore or like overstimulation is something that I go through very often. it's a part of picking up too much information about people based off of mannerisms, speech changes. So everyone has a baseline for me the longer I know them. And if something shifts, I automatically look into it. If it might be minor, it might be a change of using different words that they normally don't use. It could be the best example is with my partner. There's a certain thing that they always say when they come in every morning, like, or leave every morning, or whatever it might be. And if something different happens on their normal routine in the morning, and it could be something minor, I ask, oh, what's wrong? And they're like, how do you know what? I didn't even say anything to you yet. Yeah. Because you changed something in your pattern.
Big hypervigilance feels.
Yes. So trauma. That's what, those are the things that are always hyper on for me day to day. And grief, better. But losing someone that was really close to me, my father, has put it on high, better now, but has made those things a little bit more intense for me.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate you sharing that. I'm not going to talk about my personal experiences. I'm just looking at the time. I've done this panel a bunch, so I'm going to focus on hosting, and we're going to move right through. Let's see here. I want to talk about the past a little bit, and when you first started to realize that the stuff you were experiencing was mental illness. And this can be a bit of a tricky question. You might not have a very specific answer, and that's perfectly all right. Sometimes we know when we started experiencing the symptoms, sometimes we don't. Sometimes when we started experiencing the symptoms is very close in time to when we started connecting those symptoms to mental illness, and sometimes they are very far apart. So I just want to hear from our panelists about that, and let's mix up the order. I don't want to play favorites tonight. So Jacqueline, do you mind starting for me this time?
So I knew that I was struggling with something when I started my period late. Because I was supposed to start like when I was 12. That's when most of the women in my family started their periods. I did not start until I was 14, and even then it was very spotty. So my doctor was like, okay, we can either put you on birth control or we can send you to a therapist. And I was like, let's do both. And the first therapist I had was terrible. She was a childhood behavioral therapist, which would have been fine if she didn't spend most of my sessions talking to my mother. Mm-hmm. She gave me the MMPIA, which is the Minnesota Multiphasic Inventory, but for adolescents. And the things that came up for me were ADHD, hypomania, depression. And then she's like, oh, wow, you have a 2% chance of having narcissistic personality disorder. Let's talk about how you take everything in your environment and make it about you, because you just want attention. You don't ever emote when you're with me. And I think, you tell me all these things about how nervous you are in school and about how you have trouble making friends. I think you just want attention. I think you're being aloof so that people will just reach out to you. It took me a while to get back into therapy after that. But when I started skipping classes in college and like not doing anything but sitting in my dorm room, my then partner, now husband and nesting partner, went, you need to get into therapy or we're breaking up. You need to do that. I'm like, okay. So I get into therapy, have my ADHD. I was diagnosed very early with ADHD around the age of 6. I've never really learned to mask very well. People are like, Jax, you're so good at social situations. It's because I'm genuine and people think that's fun. But so I got into therapy, and then I wrote I did a project on, I did an individual study for college on the effects of trauma on returning soldiers, because I had a modern history class, and I decided what I wanted to do for my individual study was how soldiers returning from Afghanistan and Iran changed in their lives. And I read Judith Herman's Trauma and Recovery, and it was like somebody just busted open a door that had been locked to me for years. Like, oh, this is where all of my symptoms are coming from. This is why I keep feeling the need to pile on diagnosis after diagnosis of all these other disorders that could really just be explained by a combination of my ADHD, my upbringing, and my complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So I very strongly identify with the label of traumatized since then. And in the last 5 or so years, I've started doing reading into the Mad Pride movement that began in Canada, and also the anti-psychiatry movement, which there's parts of it I disagree with, but also like the stuff about carceral psychiatry is a huge deal. So I've been reading into that, and I find it helps to identify myself less by my diagnoses and more by queered labels like neurodivergent and mad, because it allows me to sort of explain my oeuvre without having to pull out a DSM and point at everything.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Bob, do you want to share when you started noticing things?
Yeah, and I just want to comment on something that Jack said.
Yeah.
The idea, and this has been a big thing for me in my own healing, is the self-talk back to myself saying, I am more than my diagnosis. Like, that's not who I am. I'm me. That's one piece of me, but it's not all that I am. And I really identify with your statement about all of these different diagnoses. It's really all just coming from the same place. At least I think that's what it is with me as well. But, when did I first realize, I look back and it's one of those things, well, I always knew that, but, you didn't. I think I could have been diagnosed as clinically depressed at any point in my life, and probably have, always been, but all of it rooted in very early childhood trauma, and then additionally repeated traumas as I got older. I had my first official diagnosis of depression when I moved back home to the States after being in Europe for a few years with the Army. And that was just like low key. I don't know. I don't feel like they treated it very seriously. It was just like, oh, just take this med and you'll be fine. They had me in anger management, and I don't know. But I got out and just continued taking that med until they took me off of it because of black box warning. And that's when they decided medication is not safe to take anymore. I don't know if anybody's heard of that before, but I was off and on, but seeing a psychologist for quite a while. The part where I had this, I don't know, epiphany of like, okay, there's something very not right here that I need a lot of help with. That's more than me and more than what this therapist is giving me. I was sitting on my living room floor, punching myself in the head repeatedly over and over and over again, while my wife was sitting there horrified. And that's when I just said to myself, I'm like, I need real help, like more than whatever I'm getting right now. This is a major thing and I need help with it. And through that journey was kind of when the traumas were unearthed. I could have said that, repressed memory was like, it's not a real thing. I can tell you it is a real thing. And like you said, Jax, something busted loose. Well, that's like kind of what happened to me. All of these memories from childhood, things that I think deep down, I always knew them, but I could never touch them, could never talk about them, couldn't identify them. That just all came flooding back. And I've been doing EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's very specifically a trauma treatment. And that comes from, I don't want to reach for it, but did I freeze? Oh, here we go. A book by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He's done a lot of research on trauma and the way that psychological trauma is just as real and just as biological as physical trauma. And that book has been instrumental in me understanding myself and being able to go easy on myself, saying like, if you broke your leg and you couldn't walk, would you beat yourself up about it? and this idea that trauma leaves an actual biological, injury. That's been really helpful in learning how to accept it, how to deal with it. It's tough because I don't like it, and I get angry about it sometimes. But so that's kind of where I figured out, where I'm at, and got on a good path toward healing and getting better.
Great. Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And Sade, would you share with us when you started seeing things and connecting things?
It took a while. It was ever since growing up, was always kind of a hard worker. So always working in service from 16 years old all the way up to now. So it was gig after gig, working 2 jobs and stuff like that, even in school, throughout college, all that other stuff. I was always working. I don't think I was in a safe mode in the sense of I don't have time to feel these things or diagnose or get to the bottom or introspect on it, because I need to pay bills. I need to do certain things. I was on autopilot. I transitioned jobs. I went into tech. I relearned new things, even though I went to college for something else. It was realizing that I was in an autonomous state, essentially. Obviously having fun with friends, talking to people I care about, listening to their problems, helping them with those things. But when I transitioned to tech, which is you get a little bit more free time, things are a little bit more structured and stuff like that. And also realizing that I'm a Black woman in a predominantly white space. When I used to work in Chicago, it was very, corporate is the best way to put it. So I had to dress a certain way, act a certain way. And it was rough in a different way, but it wasn't terrible. No one was like making me feel bad or anything like that. But it was a different type of stress. And then one day I had a project with a group of other designers. And it was the first time it was a group of designers that it was very comfortable. It was very, wow, this is nice. This is a really nice feeling. Like everyone is taking care of each other, looking out for each other, helping each other, being good, providing advice without it, there being under meaning to it. And realizing that I was able to tell that there was alternative meanings to conversations, people being passive aggressive all the time, but then this group of people were just literally just stating the facts and being helpful for a long project for a week or 2, I guess, a little short project, but for a whole group of designers, a long project. And there was one day that I left, it was a Friday, and it was going so well, and I felt really happy that day. And it was of course, a weekend where my partner left to go somewhere else. It was visiting family in another state or something. And I left the building and I was like, man, I'm going to go get coffee, or whatever. And as soon as I left the building, I had a panic attack so hard. I thought it was a heart attack, which my dad at the time was it runs in our family. It's something that he was very concerned about happening to one of his daughters, that hey, keep an eye on that. It does run in the family, check it out. It wasn't. I'm very healthy in the heart department. And turned out that it was a panic attack. I was told, hey, by urgent care, I'm like, hey, your body's very healthy, actually. You might want to see a therapist because it could have been a panic attack. And I was like, but why would I panic? I was fine. I was the day was great. The week was great. But realizing there was the first week where, hey, normal people talking to normal people about normal people shit and not having a moment of hey, do you know what you're talking about? I don't think you know what you're talking about. I have to, as being a Black woman in tech, having to be the expert in the room, or else, hey, all other people like you normally don't know what you're talking about. So having to be the best, because otherwise you have to be the token, essentially. And not needing to be in a group of people that were predominantly white, but very sweet, very understanding, and just like, hey, another person talking to another person was the first time that in earnest happened to me in a very long time. And it was realizing, hey, you've been traumatized and not have addressed this trauma until you are 26 years old. Hey, definitely need to see a therapist. And then realizing that, like, hey, like, we're going to start like processing your trauma and figuring out what's going on and uncovering those things. And also, I would say recently, dealing with, I wouldn't say gaps in memory, because like I think that does happen, like we're like, oh yeah, I don't remember that. For me, it's a lot of not remembering past things. So like remembering good times when there definitely were good times, and then someone will trigger it, and then a flood of memory comes back about this really nice positive thing. And it's like, wow, I didn't remember that. I didn't remember that series of movies or TV shows that I watched with my friends that we binged when I was 16. And how did I forget about that entirely? It was a great memory. How did I forget it? And that has started recently, where like having gaps in memory for being younger. And it still doesn't make me feel great realizing that, like, oh yeah, I completely forgot about it. Like, holy shit. Like realize that this year. So yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And you made me think of something that I did want to say, and that is that I know for a lot of people, when they're not used to talking about mental health, that their primary, or at least a big source of information on mental health can be from visual media, TV and movies especially. And TV and movies often don't get it right. And even if they do a good job, a lot of these things don't look and feel the same for everybody. So panic attacks being what made me think of it. Panic attacks are something that I also experience. They're not something that needs a clear trigger or a dramatic trigger. They're different for different people. And that's just something to keep in mind. If you have somebody out there who has waited to talk to a professional because you feel like the way you experience these things doesn't match your understanding of how they're experienced, it might still very, very much worth your time to reach out and talk to somebody. So I just wanted to say that before we continue forward.
Thank you.
Let's see here. So I want to bring this back to gaming. I want to know how your mental health issues have interacted with gaming for you. And this is a topic we could talk about for a very long time. So we're not gonna do 3 hours on it as much as we could. But if there's something that is striking for you, either as a fan of gaming, as a player, or as an artist, a designer, a public speaker, that you'd like to share, I'd love to hear it. And in keeping with my goal to mix up the order, Jacqueline, would you like to start?
Started last time, I think.
Oh no, that's awful. Let's make Bob start again. Bob, it's your turn.
Sure.
Sade hasn't started.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Oh, okay. Sade, would you like to start?
You're all good. Thank you. Appreciate that. I would say that recently with video games, it's been harder to get lost in a video game for me. I don't know if it's because I'm looking for a specific type of story being told in it. And it's something that me and my partner have talked about recently about some form of need not being met with certain things. So, for instance, what helps me is being a part of a game or participating in a game or something that has a story, a very in-depth story, or a story that is fully realized or met, has like every possible loophole, every possible character detail or anything like that is resolved. Where everyone that's participating doesn't necessarily have to be like every story is resolved. Every person feels like their needs have been met is the best way to put it. That definitely started because of grieving. So like I appreciate stories having to do with more complex emotions and details. So stories, or like, sorry, not stories, games, that's not the goal of it anymore. So like I love playing Destiny, or used to love playing Destiny 2. It is a sci-fi adventure, and now they're getting into heavy storytelling, but for the longest time playing it, it's just about shooting. It's just about hunting down different enemies that are bad, different groups that are like bad, but finding out, like, as the story elements started going in, there is more complexity to it than, hey, that alien is bad and whatever it might be. There's a definite, like, obviously I appreciate that, but it took a while to get there for them. For different reasons. But in the TTRPG space, you can do whatever you want. You can write whatever you want and bring in whoever you want, as long as everyone else is consenting and want to participate. I want to create more complex stories with people, collaboratively, and that makes it makes me happy to see other people engaging or participating. But also, I want to make sure every character or player feels fulfilled in their whatever goal they have, so that their stories can be told or their character can shine through as well. And the reason why this kind of triggered, probably because of my dad passing, is because there's a lot I don't know about him, and I'm never going to. So I want to make sure everyone's needs met.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. Bob, is there something that you would like to share on this?
Yeah, so for me, I got into TTRPGs very early. I'll say I attempted to dungeon master my first game of D&D when I was 6 years old. I can only imagine how awful a game that must have been to a kid who could, I didn't know the vocabulary of half of what I was reading. But for me, gaming was a place where I felt a sense of agency, where I didn't feel, in the rest of my world. I was very scared. Home wasn't a safe place. So it was an escapism, but like in a good way, right? I had power in my stories and my imagination. I could decide what it was that was going to happen to me. I got to decide what was the danger. I didn't have to face a danger I didn't want to. And so I think through, having that and creating stories, it kind of became just this lifelong, I can see where that kind of escapism could go horribly wrong and go into obsession and negative behaviors and everything. I guess I'm fortunate that it didn't catch me that way. It just became this really positive, space for me to, I don't know, feel like I could, be the person that I want to be, and not the person I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but it's the creative space. I felt like I actually had power, over something. And, that's transformed as I've gotten, older, into just the beauty of imagination. And as Sade was saying, telling the stories that you're interested in telling and being part of other people's stories, and that emotional space that can get created, at an RPG table, and that connecting with other people in like really subtle ways. Sometimes I think people sometimes don't even realize how emotional those connections are. So tabletop role-playing gaming has been really a beautifully positive thing, and key to I'll even call it survival to this point.
Agreed.
It's a great thing.
Great. Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate that. I know we're getting to time, but Ian only just gave me the 10 minutes, so I guess we're going an hour. Jacqueline, is there something you would like to share with us on this topic?
The grand overarching thing is that horror gaming became my preferred genre once I realized what was going on in my brain, because it seemed to be the genre that was most willing to explore the monstrosity of what can go on in life, right?
Mhm.
Like, it's very easy to tell trauma porn stories like A Boy Called It or whatever. Don't read it, it's a garbage book. But to be able to engage with the hyper reality of trauma, the way that your perception slows down and everything becomes more frightening and more monstrous, to the point where what Judith Herman and Bessel van der Kolk both refer to as annihilation panic. I think that's only really ever accurately referenced in different forms of horror. It's why I got into game design in a lot of ways. Changeling the Lost was my first non-D&D game that I ever read, and it's also the game that saved my life in my freshman year of college, and I was incredibly lucky to be able to write on the second edition of it. And one of the things I remember we specifically changed, because of how closely Changing the Lost hews to complex trauma, especially complex trauma from childhood or complex trauma from relationships, is in the first edition, if you told someone about your time in Faerie, you were at risk of losing clarity, which I get it, sort of, but it didn't actually really jive with the theme. In second edition, what we did is every time someone attempts to tell you that you did not experience what you experienced, or you tell yourself that, you're actually in danger of losing clarity. You are in danger of unmooring yourself from this almost agreement with yourself that, yes, this is the thing that happened to me, and yes, it's strange and weird, and I don't have a good explanation for it, but I'm gonna continue living in this world with this found family that I have. And that was honestly one of the most important changes we could have made to Changeling the Lost, and I'm really happy we did. Also, Bluebeard's Bride has become a much deeper and richer game for me when I start either playing it or running it through a trauma-informed lens.
Mhm.
So.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. We just have a few minutes left. I don't want to ask the last question I did have prepared. Sorry, panelists, because I don't think we could do it quickly well. But I will say this. If people do jump on the Discord, there is a section on the Discord for panel questions. And as long as you are respectful, I think at least some of us will be around and to have a discussion. And of course, like I said, I will put the resource slide. I'll probably stick it in panel questions. I think that's probably the best place for it. And also shoot it out on social media so that everybody has it. I want to thank my panelists. So happy that we were able to do this. If you're watching this, whether live or the recording, and you liked it, be sure to let our hosts at Virtual HorrorCon know. If you send a handwritten note with a bag of Death Wish coffee to the Gehenna Gaming P.O. Box, that is generally how you get what you want out of them. They really appreciate that. So, sorry, I don't know. I sometimes I need a little something at the end. But yeah, I want to give everyone a chance to once again throw their names out there so you can find them in everything they do. Bob, why don't you tell us where we can find Bob?
Sure, you'd have to look pretty hard if you try and finding a Bob Smith on the internet, like my witness protection name. You're not going to find me. The Gamer Assembly Discord, I don't know that's probably the most likely place you run into me. If you're at Gen Con, pop by one of my panels, pop by Games on Demand. I would love to play a game with you, no matter who you are. I just love GMing for people so much. You can hit me up on my email, e4mafia@gmail.com. Feel free, don't be shy. I think, Brian, my Twitter is incorrect on there. I believe it's at e4_mafia.
So sorry.
But, oh, that's all right. I'm hardly ever on. I'm too old to be on Twitter, so. But I'm there, kind of, sort of.
And Sade, give us your outro, please.
Everyone, Sade or Ambrose, she, they pronouns. You can find me on Twitter at @SSAmbrose_, SSAmbrose everywhere else. And yeah, that's me. You can find me normally on Carry On Comfort. We'll be doing the Once in the Future for Fables, which is going to be premiering end of this month, as well as Table Goth for Hunter, the Reckoning as well. So check us out there.
Great. And Jacqueline.
Hello, that's me. You can find me most places as Rufflejax. That's RUFFLEJAX. I have a link tree. It is also Rufflejax. I'm on Twitter as Rufflejax. My personal website is jacquelinebryk.design. There's a whole lot of places you can find me and my work. And thank you so much for having me on this panel, Brian.
You're very welcome. I appreciate your time and everybody's time. My name is Brian Liberge. On most social media, I am at Brian Liberge. I have a significantly less common name than Bob. You can also find my work on DriveThruRPG or Amazon, places that are like those two places. And you can find my self-published works at beerstargames.com. Beer like the beverage, star like the shiny thing in the sky, games like we've been paying attention to all weekend.com. I want to do one last shout out to Virtual Horror Con for hosting this panel. We really appreciate it. If you check out virtualhorrorcon.com, you can find all of our sponsors and the vendor hall, as well as the charity that we're supporting, Don't Be a Monster. Please, there is still time left to get out there and donate and shop and connect. Please connect on the Discord as well. We really appreciate everyone coming out and having a listen, and I hope you have a fantastic evening, week, month, etc. Thank you so much.